Well, after making a couple of adjustments to the audio, I hope that this sounds perhaps a little easier on the ears. We're moving forward into the themes found in John 3:14 through 21, as we have entered into what the outline says is the narrator section. Now, this is a rather important section because it contains verse 16, which probably is the most popular verse of the entire New Testament. And if we don't have it in its proper context, we will take it out of context. We know that that's not always the best thing to do. And so, one of the first things we find is that in this discussion, Jesus is talking about the being born from above. And then the subject really does change quite considerably. We find that in verse 14, the discussion, oftentimes included in other things, the ascension, descension, says no one has ascended into heaven, although there were some those. But the only one who ascends into heaven is the one who descended from heaven. And then they talk about Moses lifting up the serpent in the wilderness, which is the account in the book of Numbers, and comparing the Son of Man to Moses being lifted up for eternal life. And that continues on to verse 16. And so, at least in the NASB, the transition there throws verses 13 and 14 with the earlier part, and then verses 16 with later parts. But there are some questions about the grammatic elements that are located there. But Moses is important. That's in Numbers 21, verse 9, if you're looking at that. Moses has already appeared once in the account in the prologue, chapter 1, verse 17, and now it makes another appearance as a reference to the to him as an authority and an action that he engaged in at that point in time. We have the comparison with belief. One must believe, and through this belief that one has, one can have life eternal, literally life of the ages. In the ancient world, there was a view of life being in certain parameters, the world divided into ages. We find that picked up in Tolkien's literature, where you have Middle Earth, this Middle Age, the age of the elves, the age of the humans, and if you like the dark side, the age of the orcs. But that's a whole nother track that we could go down. We have in this section the introduction of the term world. Now it was picked up early in the earlier part. The world is cosmos in Greek, so we get cosmology, which is distinct from cosmetology, making someone look good. Cosmology is the study of how the world came into existence. John has a statement that it has come into existence through this word, but we have this discussion of the world, and there are lots of meanings and ideas about the world. There's even a podcast to listen to about specifically John's understanding of world and the various meanings, so we won't take extra time here to do that. Perhaps the most difficult word is this one that is translated as the only begotten Son. For a time, people were moving away from that translation. Some more recent translations are going back to that. It is from the Greek word monogenes, but the difference is that it has nothing to do with birthing. It means unique, one of a kind, the only one of that particularly, we could say today, genetic makeup, a very unique type of son, but nothing to be compared of in any way, shape, or form. So the monos is the one, and geneo coming into existence, not being birthed, but into existence. And then we have the parallelism in these verses. So we've talked about parallelism as a sort of writing. And so in verse 14, we have Moses lifting up the serpent in the wilderness. We have the one believing in him having eternal life. And then in 16, we have those believing shall not perish, but have eternal life. And 17, God did not send the Son of the world to judge the world, but the world could be saved. In verse 18, he who believes in him is not judged, but does not believe has been judged already because he's not believed the name of the only begotten Son of God. And so this is a negative parallelism, where on the first part, they tell you what is positive. How does one believe and have eternal life? And then the opposite is stated. That's a very normal way of rhetorical language in the ancient world. But the problem is, it now introduces the theme of judging. Now, judging and judgment and courtrooms can get fairly confusing. That's not what's being referred to here. But judging is simply making a decision. A decision is made based on whether one believes or not. We see that in verse 17 and 18. A lot of people get upset when you talk about judging because there's that one saying, don't judge others lest you yourself be judged. Whole different context for the teaching. Here we're simply saying a decision is made, and John is emphasizing it is made on one whether believes in this Son who has descended and then ascended. When we have then some language, we have one perishing, being saved. In our modern world, salvation sometimes carries a post-mortem meaning. We talk about it as what happens after one dies, but the word salvation means to deliver. And so the story of God's deliverance out of Egypt is of salvation. And I think that if we focus on salvation too much, we sometimes miss the point and go overwhelm into a post-mortem life rather than what he is talking about, the life of the ages, the life of this age, that God transforms our life into something that he wants to have happen because he rules in and over this world that is in rebellion against him through sin. Once again, the reference of believing and faith shows up, but what becomes interesting in verse 19 is the reference back to judgment. The act of judging is the light has come into the world, takes us directly back to chapter 1, verse 4, right? Men love darkness rather than the light. The light came, darkness was not able to overcome it, was not able to comprehend it, and then irrational because their deeds are evil, right? And then we have a statement. So here we have a little chiasm, right? Judgment, love darkness, deeds are evil. Middle statement, everyone loves evil, hates the light, does not come to the light. Then we have the negation, he who practices the truth comes to the light, so his deeds and actions can be seen as being wrought in God. So what does it mean ultimately to be born from above? It means that your life is demonstrating itself through your actions, that you have God's life in you and are living in a way that is light filled and not darkness filled. And so there we have a nice chiastic structure in verses 19 through 21, which we also see in chapter 1, verses 9 through 12. And so this is a important play on that. It's one of those small sections, and that wraps up this section of 3:14 through 21. We look at themes in the transition. Well, Jesus now go into Judea because they have been where? Well, seems like they have been in Jerusalem, right? Because we were in Jerusalem in verse 23. We have the discussion of Nicodemus. So perhaps he is moving from Jerusalem out into Judea. Could be that there is some time missing, right? We don't know. It's just after these things, a very common John or Johannine transition. And they go to the Jordan River and they are baptizing, and John was baptizing. And so now we have again the John coming into the picture. We haven't seen him since 1:19, so we're linking this section up with that. That helps with the question of whether we close the first section at the end of chapter 3 or in chapter 4. But we can have a witness of John in verses 25 through 30, and he is giving testimony. He repeats some of what he says, And baptism is a sense of purification. And the emphasis that Jesus must increase and he must decrease. Verse 28 says, "You're my witnesses. I said I'm not the Christ." So that goes all the way back to 119. And I've been sent ahead of him. And so then we have the closing section of 31 through 36, which I think is the narrator's voice. We have some similar themes from earlier. We have the idea of from above, right? We have the concept of perhaps descending. The one who comes from heaven is a descent language. We have chiastic structure in verse 31, right? The first half, he who comes from above is above all. Then we have he who is of the earth is from the earth. And then this next sentence, he who comes from heaven is above all. And then in the last part, right? Sorry, that was the last part. So he's of the earth, speaks of the earth, is from the earth, and then speaks to the earth, and then he who comes from heaven is above all. So you have heaven, earth, heaven, which is a little chiastic structure. Sorry about that, a little confusing there. Then we have, again, a return to witness. Verse 33, the one who is witness. Verse 34, the one who speaks the words of God, right? Number 36, the one who believes has this life, right? Why? Because one has believed the witness. And so that raises the whole question: is his testimony received, not received? We'll be building on witness and testimony in chapter 4 of John and chapter 5 of John. It takes a little hiatus for a while before returning later in the book. And the final theme is also of belief. So that's where we're going to stop at this point as we've finished the themes of this section. And then we may come back and talk about the main ideas.